Hi, my name's Christy Snyder. I'm 35 and I live in Philadelphia. I've lived here for about 12 years. Originally from Pittsburgh, lived in central PA, went to college in South Carolina. So I've moved around a good bit, but fell in love with Philly and have been here for a while. I like to bake, ride my bike, do cross stitch and embroidery, other textiles, sewing, knitting, and I also really like reading. I love going to concerts and also trying new restaurants around the city. Also like to go hiking, getting outside. I am a writer and an editor full time. Currently for Healthline, where I've been for a few years. It's really great to work on health-driven content that helps the masses and all kinds of different populations. So I'm really passionate about helping others through my writing. I'm going to talk about my psychosis experience today. A little bit of a content warning. I'll be discussing anxiety, depression, suicidality, paranoia, some sexual trauma. So just a heads up, in case you need to turn off the video. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So a little bit about my mental health history. I have been in therapy for most of my life. When I was 5, I was sexually assaulted by a babysitter. And I guess I was a smart 5-year-old. I told my parents the next day after it happened, and they took me to the hospital. So I went to therapy as a kid, and throughout my adolescence, play therapy, talk therapy. So play therapy is a lot of like having like little toys or things you can kind of fidget with while you talk about what you've been through. I've had sleep issues my whole life related to anxiety and falling asleep as a result of that sexual assault. It occurred in the evening at night, and for a long time, I had a lot of repeated stress around that. Like I said, anxiety and depression have, almost always been with me. As a child and as a teenager, my anxiety was worse, but as I've gotten older, my anxiety has improved, but my depression has worsened. I started taking Zoloft probably in my sophomore or junior year of high school, a low dose, and it helped then. I didn't stay on it for a long time. I kind of had some self-stigma about being on medication, so I was off of it for a long time. I went through some other traumas that have contributed to my mental health. When I was 17, I witnessed a swimmer at a pool where I was lifeguarding pass away. It was very traumatic, and I was the youngest lifeguard involved. So that left a big impact on me. And then I also was bitten by a pit bull, unfortunately, in my early 20s. And that was really damaging both to me physically, although I was okay. And mentally, it made me very scared, and I didn't feel safe in my neighborhood. Also in my 20s, I was in an emotionally abusive relationship. I was stuck in a cycle of abuse for about 5 years. It was a Me Too situation, I would say. That abuser has had other folks that he's abused over the years, and I've gotten to talk to some of them and support each other that way. But the emotionally abusive relationship really took a toll on my mental health after I had worked hard to get where I was and work on my depression and anxiety. So in that recovery from abuse, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which I've probably had most of my life. Bad dreams, being kind of twitchy, easily startled, reliving stressful situations. All of that I've gotten to work through in the past few years. Other types of therapy that I've done have been EFT, which is the tapping you may have heard of, the emotional freedom technique. And typically I have gone through cognitive behavioral therapy. So kind of what the typical talk therapy you've heard of. I have switched therapists quite a few times over the past 10 to 15 years to find the right fit. And I'm really happy. I see a licensed marriage and family therapist now. And I really found that that's been helpful. So getting into my mental health decline that led to my psychotic episode. I, as I said, live in Philly and I got a job in New York City. It was very, very exciting. I worked really hard to get there. And the job required me to be in office 5 days a week. Now, this was before the pandemic. So I chose to commute to New York and pay out of pocket for that rather than move up to the city or to Brooklyn to commute in. I really love Philadelphia and just didn't want to move to New York in my 30s. But I did have to continue going into the office. So that involved some pretty long bus rides. Train rides were great, but more expensive. So I frequently would take the bus, take the train sometimes. I was commuting essentially 4 hours a day. And as soon as I got home at night, I basically had to get ready and go to bed for the next day. So I kind of got really worked up. First of all, getting the job, I felt like it was success. And I got really scared that my abusive ex was going to come and take what I had achieved away from me. I think that was largely just some paranoia that continued to grow. It was almost like, do I deserve these good things in my life? And is he going to come take them away from me? Is something going to happen where I, end up without the things I've worked so hard to achieve? And so I started having a lot of trouble sleeping. So not like the normal occasional trouble falling asleep that I've dealt with most of my life. But I started staying up till like 3, 4 in the morning, having to get up at 5:30. So sleeping very, very little. And that continued on for weeks. And I noticed I just started feeling off and continually, having different thoughts that seemed weird and off-putting. And it was more than just intrusive thoughts. It was thoughts that I knew were irrational and unreasonable. And at that time, I wasn't on any medication. So let's just be clear about that. I wasn't on any medication, and I surely should have been on Zoloft. So I had a sensory hallucination. One morning, I was waiting for the subway to get to the bus station to head to New York, and I thought I smelled a chemical smell. And it was like 6:30 in the morning. I started asking people around me who are also waiting for the train, oh, do you smell that? It smells weird. It smells like a gas leak. Is something wrong? And I knew that I could not go to New York that day and that my continual absence of sleep was catching up to me, and that I was really, really starting to feel unwell. So I took myself to the hospital. I went to the ER, and I also felt suicidal at that point. Not that I actually wanted to end my life, but I started feeling like I was in this never-ending commute, work, stay up all night and worry about my life, commute, just it caught up to me very quickly. And I think it was a result of the stress I had encountered in my life prior to this job. It was very situational, but I think my history definitely, the childhood trauma, sort of the issues I've had throughout my life up until then, and the emotionally abusive relationship played into that as well. That the paranoia of someone who had hurt me so much, sort of coming for my future life, really affected me. So at the hospital, I was checked in, and I was taken to the crisis center, which is a very niche area of the hospital. It's basically locked down. Um, there were a lot of people in the waiting room who were in withdrawals from drug or alcohol, other substances. There were homeless folks in there. There were other people having mental health crises like myself. So I was checked out multiple times, drug tested, talked to doctors. At this point, I was absolutely in psychosis. I was yelling at people. I was yelling my ex's name. I was worried that someone was coming to get me. I was absolutely out of reality. I knew I was in the hospital, but I was unable to have a conversation that made sense with anyone. So my parents and my boyfriend came to the hospital and were there with me. I was able to have one support person at a time in the crisis center with me. And then I was transported to a behavioral health center. There were no beds available in the psych area of that hospital. So I was transported, and I was put into a acute mental health crisis unit at the behavioral health center. I was there for about a week. My parents came and brought me clothes, so I was able to have visitors once in a while. It was very regimented, breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the same time every day, therapy, group therapy, free time, exercise time. And initially, I was very scared to take the meds that they wanted to have me on. So they put me on an antipsychotic, which the name is very scary. But I found that once I started taking the meds as prescribed and sleeping again, that I started to feel better. And since I was voluntary, I was able to leave when I was ready. So when I started feeling a good bit better, I was able to go home. And at that point, I'm no longer in psychosis. So I know that, like, oh, this thing happened to me. I don't really understand what happened. I want to understand it. I also really felt like I wanted to be better right away. I wanted to go right back to my life. And I really struggled to understand my diagnosis and medications. I wanted to come off of my meds. I wanted to just go ahead and move on with my life. And what I learned in my recovery is that it was traumatic for my brain to experience this, and that my brain needed plenty of time to recover, and that I had to be kind to myself and give my brain a chance to recover. So after struggling for a few months, not knowing exactly what to do, I did maintain my job at this time, but I was able to start working from home, and this was just shortly before the pandemic. So I had kind of a head start on the working from home situation that we all ended up in, or most of us ended up in for a good bit of time. And then I found a program at the University of Pennsylvania. It's called the PERC program, PERC. It is an early psychosis intervention program in PA. In the PERC program, I received peer support, which was really important to me because I didn't then, and I don't now know anyone personally who has had a psychotic episode. And so it was helpful to know that I could talk to someone who had been through something similar, despite having their own unique symptoms and recovery, just to kind of talk about life and recovery. I did keep my job, as I mentioned. I was able to switch jobs soon after, back in a local Philadelphia company. I worked a lot with my therapist to create a checklist for myself of things to check in about, particularly paranoia, other things that are important for me to keep in check to make sure that I'm stable. Exercise, eating well, sleeping well, having fun activities in my life, having great support people around me, and keeping my stress levels low. Um, I learned a lot about complex PTSD and recovery. Complex PTSD is when you've had multiple traumas or adverse events throughout your life. Complex PTSD has more severe symptoms for some folks. Um, Something else I also started doing in my recovery has been talking to others about psychosis. I've been able to be open with my support system, my friends, my family. Everyone knows about what happened, and I'm able to help reduce the stigma for myself and for others by being an advocate and talking about it. I've also written about psychosis. I wrote a first person point of view article for Healthline, which is live on the site if you'd like to read it, about my experience. So I was in the PERK program for 2 years, and then I did step down services, which means they helped me find a psychiatrist and a therapist to continue taking care of myself. My psychiatrist is the same psychiatrist from PERK who runs the residency program at Penn Psychiatry. So I'm able to still see him, and he understands my situation and what I've been through and what my triggers might be. The meds that I take now, I take Zoloft, and I will probably always be on that. It helps a lot with my depression. I also take Geodon, which is a type of antipsychotic. I've also taken Abilify before. I've taken Zyprexa. So I've tried a few different antipsychotics. There are pros and cons to them. I did notice that my weight fluctuated a good bit on the antipsychotics, and I've talked to others who have had similar experiences with that. So I focus on exercise and eating well and drinking a lot of water, taking care of myself. So yeah, I've really been able to recover in a big way. And I've worked really, really hard to do that. And I've been lucky to be able to afford the resources and advocate for myself. And that's one thing I really learned through this whole experience, is that advocating for yourself and your health can be an uphill battle. It can be expensive. It can be a lot of phone calls, a lot of appointments. And if something isn't working, like your therapist is not connecting well with you, or you find that, your things aren't going well with your psychiatrist, you can switch. It might be a pain in the butt, but you could do it. I've just learned to really trust myself and know who I am, and know that, mental health is health, and it's one of the most important things. I think that, if you don't have it, you don't have anything, really. And so I'm just really thankful that my story has worked out the way that it has.